I want to share with you this morning 2 stories. And I would share 3 stories, but because we just had such a long gospel reading, I'm going to spare you some time. So you get 2 stories for the price of 3 this morning. How about that? I'm going to start by sharing 2 stories, and both of these stories are stories that took place within the last couple of days. First one I'm going to tell you is about what happened on Friday. So Friday for me started off just like any normal day. You know, things were going perfectly fine. Went out, took my dog for a walk, and then at a certain point I had a lunch meeting with a friend and colleague. She's a priest at St. Barnabas, and so I went and met her for lunch. And on my way back from lunch, I noticed I had my windows open in my car, and I noticed a clicking noise. And I noticed that as the car went faster, the clicking went faster. And as I slowed down, the clicking slowed down. And I thought, oh, that sounds like something wrong with the tire. I'm gonna pull in a parking lot and check this out. So I pulled into a parking lot and looked at the front tire, and I noticed there was a rock in the tread, and it was a pretty good sized rock. It was about an inch diameter rock, and I thought, well, maybe the rock is hitting the road and making that clicking sound. So I pulled the rock out of the tread, no big deal. And I thought, I'm going to check the back tire just in case. And so I'm running my hand around the tire to see if there's anything there. And my hand caught the end of what was an Allen wrench that was about this long, and then had, the other piece had punctured the tire. And when I went like this, it caught the piece of it, and it went. So my tire is gushing air, right? And now I would have changed the tire. But I had previously ran over another nail, and this nail happened to be in a place on the tire that was not replaceable or repairable. And so when I took it to the tire shop, they said, well, how about we just put your spare on the car, and then we'll put this tire on the back, and then when you get around to it, you can change that spare later. Well, guess when later turned out to be? Later turned out to be Friday, because I couldn't change the tire. So now I had a flat tire and I had a flat spare. I had to call for a tow truck. Okay, if you've called for a tow truck in your life, you know that they tell you 30 minutes, but when they say 30 minutes, that turns out to be more like 2 hours. So I was waiting in a parking lot for 2 hours. Now this is a really bad part, is that I was like half a mile or less away from a tire shop. I wish I had turned into that parking lot instead of the parking lot I was in, because I had to wait 2 hours and pay $100 to get towed about 2 blocks to a building that I could literally see from where I was. But you can't drive on a flat tire, and I didn't have another tire. So I'm waiting there for 2 hours. The driver comes and gets me. I get to the tire shop. I have to spend another $200 on the tire, because I thought, well, that tire, the one that went flat, they were able to repair, but I don't want to do this again, so let's just buy a new spare. So $200 for a new spare. All the time that I spent there for, waiting, trying to kill the time, and I'm grumpy, and I'm feeling kind of bummed, and I'm feeling angry and sad and frustrated. And I go sit on the chair. If you've been in a tire shop, you can picture it in your mind, right? They have the setup along the windows usually. And so I'm in a chair, and there's a chair next to me here, an empty chair, and then the other chairs are along the wall there. Well, then a mother and her young child, a little girl, I would guess no more than 5 years old, comes in the door. And the little girl runs over and sits down in the chair next to me, and her mom says, well, don't you want to sit over here with me? And she says, no, this is fine. And she looks up to me and she says, hi. And I say, hi. And she says, guess what I've got? What do you have? I have a leapfrog. Okay, what's a leapfrog? A leapfrog is a video game. Oh, neat. What kind of video games? It has learning games. Wow, learning games. And so she asked me if I wanted to play her leapfrog video games with her, and she was showing me how she does it, and it was very cute and very endearing. And I noticed she had some cowboy boots on that had some glitter, like pink and purple glittery sparkles on the cowboy boots. And I said, well, those sure are pretty cowboy boots. And she says, no, these are cowgirl boots because I'm a girl. I said, right you are. You showed me. You showed me. Well, it turns out their car wasn't going to be ready right away, and so they wanted to go for a little walk. And so she jumps up and she says, "Okay, we're going to go for a hike now. Bye!" And she skips out the door. And where I'm going with this story is that this interaction with this little girl totally turned my afternoon around. I was feeling grumpy and frustrated and bummed out, and this little girl brought just this pure joy into my heart, and it just changed the course of the day. So something good happened, even though something bad happened before. Okay, and the second story I want to share with you is a story that happened yesterday, not too far from where you're sitting right now, just on the street out here. If you were here at Powwow yesterday, then you know that there had been an accident early in the morning. There was a vehicle that was turning left from the street next to us here. The vehicle was turning left early in the morning onto Union Hills. And if you've been driving on any east-west street this time of year, you know that when the sun comes up, essentially right in your eyes. So he turned left onto Union Hills, and the sun was in his eyes, and he didn't see, and there was a motorcyclist. And he hit the motorcyclist, and they had the road blocked off, and it was not a pretty sight. The paramedics came and took the motorcyclist away. And so when I got here, this had already happened. And I see all the commotion there, and I think I better go and check on this, because what happens is sometimes we call it a second victim. The second victim, because the first victim obviously is the motorcyclist, but the second victim is the driver of the vehicle, because that driver didn't do this on purpose. And so now this driver is probably, I'm thinking, probably panicking, probably, scared, probably worried. And I think I'm going to go and check on him, see how he's doing, right? So I see a group of people over here in the corner, and I think, well, that's clearly the family that was involved, because the young driver is, standing there kind of pacing and just kind of trembling. And when I get over to introduce myself to him, his eyes are kind of glassy, and he tells me that he's worried about this motorcyclist, which I certainly would be as well. So he asked me if we could pray for the motorcyclist. So we prayed for the motorcyclist together. We prayed for the doctors and the nurses and the paramedics, and we prayed for him and his safety. And after we prayed together, an officer came by to him and said, I have an update for you. He underwent emergency surgery, and he's in stable condition. So the motorcyclist was in stable condition at that point. I don't know how his condition has been since then, but he was in stable condition at that point. And the officer explains to the young man, he couldn't have been, more than, 22. And she explains to the young man, hey, we have to do a field sobriety test. I'm not suspicious that you're under the influence of anything, but it's just protocol. It's just what we have to do. And so the young man comes up and stands there, and he's kind of trembling. And she asks him, are your knees okay to do this? And he kind of says, well, yeah. And she says, if you're not, you need to tell me. You need to let me know, because I'm going to have you stand on one foot. And if your knees are shaky and you stand on one foot and you fall, I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to hit your head on the concrete. So you need to let me know. And he says, well, then maybe we better wait a minute. And she says, we can do that. And he's still kind of trembling. And he looks at the officer, and the officer says, this happens every day. I know you don't see it every day, but this happens every day. And that this was clearly an accident. These things happen. Cycles can be dangerous. And so I know that you're feeling bad, but really this is, these kinds of things happen. And he's still trembling, and she says, do you need a hug? And he kind of says, yeah. And this officer reaches around and gives this young man a big bear hug while she's getting ready to do this field sobriety test. Okay, And after she walked away, I told the family, come by and, if you want to come by the church and chat with me, let me know. I'm happy to make myself available, but just come by. And as I'm walking back, I see the officer, and I get her attention. I say, can I tell you something? And she says, yeah. I said, I just wanted to say thank you for your kindness. Thank you for the kindness that you showed that young man, because it was very beautiful. It was very beautiful to see that interaction of kindness. That's not something that jumps to my mind when I think of that kind of an interaction, is an officer offering a hug to a young man who is clearly traumatized. Okay, so where am I going with these two stories? Right? So these two stories involve situations that were not good. They were not good situations. And at the same time, these stories have pieces of them that have real joy and beauty, right? The joy that young girl brought to me that changed my day, right? And the joy that was experienced when this officer hugged this young man and comforted him, right? And I hear people say a lot that everything happens for a reason. I don't think that's exactly the way it works, right? Because that's kind of assuming that God is playing with us like we're pawns on a game board, right? And that God is saying, "Oh, let's make something happen here, and then I'll throw this little girl into the mix, and that'll I'll give Tim a flat tire so that he can meet this little girl." Right? It doesn't quite work that way, right? That's not why I got the flat tire. That's not why this young man was in this automobile accident, right? Because he could meet this officer who would show him compassion. That's not why it happened, but something good did happen even though the bad thing happened, right? In both of these stories. And that's what we are experiencing this week in the church as we enter this season of Holy Week. I've heard people say you can't have Easter without Good Friday. And I suppose in a sense that's true, right? Had Jesus not died on the cross, then he wouldn't have risen from the dead 3 days after. But Jesus didn't die on the cross so that he could resurrect. He died on the cross because he was a threat. He was a threat to the people in authority. That's why Jesus died on the cross. The resurrection happened anyway. The resurrection happened despite of all that happening. Right? So the good happened and came out of the bad thing, but the bad thing didn't happen so that the good thing could happen. Now, we're going through kind of a roller coaster of a week, and we even have a roller coaster of a day today, because we started outside with the triumphant entry into Jerusalem. That's the Palm Sunday gospel. Then we share the Passion gospel as we read together, and the reason for that is because what would we do if we didn't go to church on Good Friday, and then we hear the triumphant entry story today, and then a week later we hear about the resurrection? Right? We skip a pretty important piece of that story if for some reason we can't make it on Good Friday. So we share that whole piece of that story today on Palm Sunday, but we have that roller coaster, and we're about to enter that roller coaster as we get close to Maundy Thursday, and we approach Good Friday, and then we approach Easter. One of the things we want to address, just as a little sidebar, people say, well, why is it called Good Friday? Because on Good Friday, certainly something very bad happened. The crucifixion of Jesus is not a good thing. There are two explanations that I've been able to find, and I think the second one is more accurate. Okay, the first explanation is that good may have been an old English spelling of the word God, like God's Friday. And if we look at the word goodbye, that means God be with you. That's where we get our word goodbye. It means God be with you. And so Good Friday was God's Friday. That's one theory. The other theory is probably more likely the case, and that is that good is an old English word that means holy. And the occurrence that I can think of that we still use in today's vernacular is that we sometimes call the Bible the good book. So Good Friday is Holy Friday. And we talk about Lent as getting us ready, getting us prepared for Easter, but it's really preparing us for Good Friday, isn't it? It's preparing us for Good Friday, not for Easter, because we've been kind of mourning. We haven't been, shouting our hymns of praise. Right? We've been getting ready for the crucifixion of Jesus, not for the resurrection of Jesus. And so we have this opportunity this week to go through Holy Week and open our hearts to the emotional roller coaster that we experience along the way. Because each day during Holy Week has a little different feel to it and a little different experience. And so I invite all of us to open our eyes, open our hearts to this emotional experience that we go through. And I invite all of us to go through this week as if we are the disciples or as if we are Mary, the mother of Jesus. Because we can always get ready. We can always say, well, Easter's coming and we're getting ready to celebrate Easter. But what if we don't know that Easter's coming? What if we don't know? The disciples didn't know. The disciples didn't know that 3 days later Jesus would be raised. Mary, Jesus' mother, didn't know that 3 days later he would be raised. So let's sit with those uncomfortable feelings, those emotions that we don't really like. We become friends with those because those emotions inform us. They give us information about who we are, about who other people in our lives are. And we can learn a lot about ourselves as we enter Holy Week. So let's not jump ahead to Easter quite yet. We've got plenty of time to celebrate Easter. We've got 50 days of Easter. Right now we're in Holy Week. Let's enter Holy Week. And as we do so, we make friends with our emotions, even our unpleasant emotions. And we remember that when bad things happen, sometimes good things do happen. Right? We experience both of those. We experience the dichotomy. But if we don't allow ourselves to understand the times of sorrow, then we don't get a chance to fully appreciate the joy. So let's focus on the sorrow that we experience during Holy Week. And when we arrive at that time of resurrection, the joy will be so much more powerful in our hearts. Amen.